The world woke up to a bold, shocking move: U.S. forces seizing Nicolas Maduro from the heart of Caracas. On the surface, this is another chapter in the ever-complicated story of global power struggles. But for Russian President Vladimir Putin, this moment isn't just another headline. This is a potential turning point, a moment that could reshape not only the political landscape in Venezuela, but the very foundation of Russia's global standing. Why? Because this action goes far beyond Venezuela. It goes straight to the heart of Russia's energy dominance, its shadow fleet, and the future of its geopolitical clout. It could be the catalyst for a U.S. push to lower global oil prices, stripping away Russia's most powerful asset. And it could reignite tensions in Ukraine, a war Putin is determined to control. But what is the real cost for Russia? And what could be the true consequences of Trump's military operation for the future of both countries and the world? Let's dive deeper. To understand what's really at stake, we need to look at the broader context: what led to this bold move and why it matters to Russia. The U.S. has long been active in its efforts to shift the political landscape in Latin America, but this operation is different. The military action in Venezuela isn't just about one country. It's about asserting influence, not only in the Western Hemisphere, but globally. Russia, for its part, has been deeply embedded in Venezuela for over 2 decades. Moscow has invested heavily in Venezuela's oil industry, one of the largest in the world, seeing it as both a strategic ally and a valuable economic asset. But now, with the seizure of Maduro, that alliance is at risk. This is not just a diplomatic snub. It threatens Russian investments, trade, and the very basis of its oil strategy. But there's more beneath the surface. For Putin, this is a moment of reckoning. The geopolitical implications are far-reaching. Trump's actions might just be the prelude to a much larger confrontation, one that Russia has to prepare for. Russia's deep ties with Venezuela aren't new. Over the past 20 years, Moscow has built a strategic partnership with Caracas, one driven largely by energy interests. Venezuela's vast oil reserves have long been a vital piece of Russia's global energy strategy, providing an avenue to bolster its influence in the region. Russia has lent billions to Venezuela, backing oil projects, arms deals, and even political maneuvers. But these ties aren't just about trade, they are about power. Venezuela has been a key ally in challenging U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere, a crucial part of Russia's broader effort to counterbalance American influence on the world stage. For Moscow, standing by Maduro was about more than just economic stakes. It was about sending a message that Russia would not stand idly by while the U.S. moved in to dismantle the political landscape in its neighborhood. Now, with the U.S. military action in Caracas, the stakes have shifted. Russia must reconsider its position and its role in a world where the U.S. isn't just shaping the geopolitical narrative, but enforcing it with military power. The news broke with stunning speed. U.S. forces had captured Nicolas Maduro. The political shockwaves were immediate, but the economic impact was swift and far-reaching, particularly for Russia. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. The U.S. had struck at the heart of Russia's investments in Venezuela, its oil industry. For years, Russia had been the primary backer of Venezuela's oil infrastructure, pumping billions into the country's oil fields, all while building its influence over Latin American energy markets. But now, with the fall of Maduro, Russia faces the reality that those investments may be lost. Venezuela's oil industry could collapse without Maduro at the helm, and Russia's massive financial stake may be for nothing. This is where the crisis deepens. If Venezuela's oil exports dwindle, it would devastate Russian revenue. As it stands, Russia already struggles with low oil prices, but this could push the country into an even more precarious situation. Russia's economy, deeply intertwined with energy exports, is on the line. And then there's the question that Putin can't ignore: how far will the U.S. go to control Venezuela's oil? The answer could have grave consequences for Russia's own oil exports and its global position. What we're witnessing is more than just a geopolitical conflict, it's an economic game played in the shadows. Behind the headlines, one of Russia's most critical assets is at risk, the Shadow Fleet. This network of tankers operating outside the prying eyes of the international community is responsible for smuggling Russian oil to markets that are otherwise closed off due to sanctions. For years, this clandestine fleet has allowed Russia to sidestep Western sanctions, keeping its energy trade alive and well. But with U.S. actions in Venezuela, Putin has to ask, will this operation signal the start of a broader crackdown on Russia's shadow fleet? The U.S. has already made moves to seize Russian tankers moving in and out of Venezuela, and if this pressure intensifies, it could spark a larger confrontation. For Putin, this isn't just about losing a few ships, this is about the entire infrastructure that keeps Russia's oil revenues flowing. A sustained attack on the Shadow Fleet could force a strategic shift in how Russia approaches its energy exports. The game is no longer just about oil, it's about survival in the global energy arena. The first crisis was economic, but the second is geopolitical, and it's a much sharper threat. If Russia's oil trade is squeezed, Moscow could retaliate in ways that dramatically escalate tensions with the West. Putin has already made it clear that Russia will not back down easily in this contest, especially if it feels cornered. But what happens if the U.S. doesn't stop at Venezuela? What if the U.S. shifts from a military operation in one country to broader sanctions or even direct actions targeting Russian interests elsewhere? With an aggressive push into the Western Hemisphere, the U.S. could begin to challenge Russian interests across the globe in places like Syria, Libya, and even in Ukraine, where tensions have already reached a boiling point. A more aggressive U.S. strategy aimed at cutting off Russia's energy exports would lead to a diplomatic firestorm. It could push Russia into a defensive stance where every move is calculated in terms of retaliation. The risk of conflict intensifies, and the pressure to protect Russian assets grows ever stronger. Putin must now ask, how far is the U.S. willing to go? And how far will Russia go to protect its interests in the face of mounting pressure? While global leaders are focused on oil prices and military strategies, the reality of this crisis is felt most acutely by the people both in Russia and Venezuela. For ordinary Russians, the effects of a collapsing oil market will hit hard. The cost of living will rise, and the economy will stagnate. The Russian government's ability to deliver on promises of growth and stability will be severely compromised. But the pain is even more immediate in Venezuela. For years, the Venezuelan people have suffered under economic collapse, food shortages, and political turmoil. With Maduro's capture, the country faces the prospect of an even bleaker future. The loss of Russian support, the collapse of the oil industry, and the tightening of U.S. sanctions could plunge Venezuela into an even deeper crisis. For the people of both countries, this geopolitical struggle is not just about power, it's about survival. The toll of this conflict will be felt on a personal level as families across the globe bear the brunt of economic and political decisions made by leaders far removed from their daily lives. The human cost is rising, and it's one that's easy to ignore in the midst of the global power play. But for many, it's the one that will leave the deepest scars. The reverberations of the U.S. actions in Venezuela are not confined to the Americas or even to Russia. The global impact is profound. Beyond the immediate economic fallout for Russia, the geopolitical consequences of Trump's intervention are reshaping international alliances and strategies. For one, the seizure of Maduro signals a broader U.S. push to assert its dominance over the Western Hemisphere, a push that runs directly counter to Russia's ambitions in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. This could galvanize nations across the globe to either align with the U.S. or challenge it more directly. China, another global power with interests in Venezuela, is watching closely. Its own investments in Venezuela's oil sector are at risk, and the U.S. has already signaled its intent to challenge Beijing's growing influence in the region. As China responds, we may see a realignment of global alliances, one that could reshape economic and military relations for decades to come. The U.S. intervention in Venezuela has sparked a wider battle for influence, one that will stretch far beyond the borders of Latin America. The ripple effect of this conflict is already being felt in distant capitals as nations reassess their relationships and strategies in an increasingly volatile global landscape. As we look to the future, three potential scenarios emerge from the current crisis. Each one carries significant implications not only for Russia and the US, but for the entire world. The optimistic scenario, a diplomatic settlement. In this scenario, the US and Russia find common ground. Venezuela's oil industry stabilizes and tensions ease. The US backs off from further economic pressure while Russia adapts to the new global energy market. The diplomatic tension between Moscow and Washington finds a way to de-escalate, with the US recognizing Russia's strategic interests in its own sphere of influence. The global oil market stabilizes, and countries across the world return to a more balanced relationship. The middle ground, a standoff. Here both Russia and the US dig in their heels. Moscow responds to US sanctions with its own countermeasures, leading to a prolonged standoff. Venezuela's oil production continues to flounder, and economic consequences ripple across the globe. Both countries maintain their positions in the geopolitical struggle, but the tension becomes a low-burning conflict that never truly resolves. Countries like China and India attempt to broker peace, but the global economy remains volatile, with oil prices fluctuating and trade routes in jeopardy. The worst-case scenario, escalation to a global confrontation. In the worst-case scenario, the situation spirals out of control. The US continues to ramp up pressure on Russia's shadow fleet and takes aggressive steps to undermine Russian oil exports. Putin, facing mounting economic pressures and growing domestic dissatisfaction, retaliates with military actions in Ukraine or other strategic areas. The geopolitical tug-of-war escalates into a full-blown confrontation, drawing in NATO, China, and other powers. The global economy is thrown into chaos, and the world faces the threat of a major conflict. Each of these scenarios carries its own set of risks and rewards, but they all hinge on how Russia responds to the evolving US actions in Venezuela. Putin will have to decide how much he is willing to risk and what he is prepared to lose in the coming months and years. The world is at a crossroads, and Vladimir Putin stands at the center of it. The US seizure of Nicolas Maduro is a pivotal moment in history, one that could either reshape the global order or deepen the divisions that already exist. For Russia, the stakes have never been higher. The question isn't just about what happens next in Venezuela or Ukraine, it's about the very future of its position on the global stage. Will it be able to adapt, recalibrate, and hold its ground? Or will the pressure from the US and its allies force Putin into a corner from which there is no return? As the world watches, Putin's next moves will be critical. His response to this crisis could either ignite a new chapter of international cooperation, or it could escalate into a conflict with consequences far beyond what anyone anticipates. The US has made its move, but the game is far from over. The future of global oil markets, international law, and the balance of power itself rests on how Putin chooses to navigate the path ahead. Keep an eye on this developing story. As we enter this new phase, the ripple effects will be felt across the globe. The future is uncertain, but one thing is clear: the stakes have never been higher.